Helena, I need you to confirm, given our history, our time together at Harvard Law, our years as rival corporate prosecutors, can you ethically hear this case? We were colleagues, not sisters, Evelyn. And it's been 30 years. I am within the ethical guidelines. But why represent yourself, Evie? Your opponent is Marcus Thorne. He specializes in elder law and has a reputation for being pitiless. He's relying entirely on his own assumptions about the defendant, I murmured, staring at the shelf of annotated case law in Arthur's study. And that's his biggest mistake. I want him to commit to every single one of those assumptions. I want him to believe, unequivocally, that he is battling a confused old woman with no legal representation and no understanding of his procedure. I need him to overextend himself. You're building a trap, aren't you? Helena's voice was filled with a mixture of terror and delight. I am simply preparing my defense, Helena. The one I abandoned 30 years ago to raise my daughter. I paused. Arthur always knew this day would come. He knew the moment I stopped being mom and became the vault key, they would challenge me. Back in the courtroom, Judge Vance had finished reading Mr. Thorne's opening statement, which detailed the carnage of the Cypress Hill Fund. Thorne, confident and theatrical, was now cross-examining me. Mrs. Sterling, your son-in-law, Mr. Brooks, has testified that on 3 separate occasions, he offered to sit down and reconcile the Cypress Hill Fund's ledger. Is that accurate? I adopted my best bewildered gaze. Oh, Gregory, yes. He was ever so helpful. But I kept misplacing the password. All those letters and numbers, you know. It's hard to keep track when you're my age. Thorne beamed at the jury box, a small advisory one, filled with 3 neutral financial experts the judge had appointed. And yet, despite your admitted difficulty with simple digital accounting, you proceeded to make 3 enormous undocumented wire transfers from that fund, totaling nearly $150,000. Correct? Well, I did tell Arthur I'd handle it, I mumbled, fiddling with a button on my jacket. He trusted me. I'm just not sure where the money went precisely. I recall helping a few people. It's all a bit blurry now, Charlotte whispered to Gregory, a look of vindication on her face. Case closed. This was the perfect evidence of catastrophic incompetence. Your Honor, Thorne said, addressing the bench with finality. This testimony, combined with the documentary evidence of 3 large, unreceipted withdrawals, constitutes clear and convincing evidence that Mrs. Sterling lacks the basic cognitive capacity to understand the nature and consequences of her financial decisions, particularly when dealing with an $85 million portfolio. We demand the immediate appointment of a conservator. Judge Vance adjusted her glasses. Mrs. Sterling, is this your defense? That you cannot recall where $150,000 went? I straightened up, letting the confusion drain from my face, replacing it with something cold and precise. The act was over. No, Your Honor, that was merely a demonstration. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a slim, leather-bound portfolio, not the cheap plastic one they expected, but a high-grade legal binder. A demonstration of the prejudice and selective listening of the plaintiff's counsel. Mr. Thorne's case rests entirely on the assumption that because I look like a frail, confused old woman, my actions are inherently incompetent, rather than deliberate. They never once asked who received those funds. Thorne's smile faltered. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is engaging in theatrical posturing. Overruled, Mr. Thorne, Judge Vance snapped, her eyes gleaming. Mrs. Sterling, proceed with your documentation. Thank you, Your Honor. I stood tall, the slight stoop in my posture vanishing. The 3 wire transfers Mr. Thorne mentioned were indeed made by me. The first $60,000 went to the Eastwick Veterans Education Fund to cover tuition for 2 disabled students. The second, $45,000, was a seed investment in Solaris Technologies, a startup run by a high school dropout from a disadvantaged neighborhood. And the final $50,000 was distributed to Project Safe Haven to buy temporary housing for abused women. I walked to the court clerk and handed over the binder. Inside that portfolio, Your Honor, you will find fully executed IRS 501c3 documentation for each recipient charity, a 36-page business plan and financial forecast for Solaris Technologies, and certified repayment schedules for the funds, which are designed to be paid back into the Cypress Hill Fund over 5 years, turning it into a self-sustaining microloan organization. I turned to Thorne, whose face was pale. These were not undocumented withdrawals, Mr. Thorne. They were impact investments made after weeks of due diligence. The only reason the ledger looked messy to your clients is that they are financially illiterate outside the confines of a stock ticker and never bothered to use the customized philanthropic accounting software Arthur built specifically for that. Fun. The courtroom was silent. Charlotte was staring at me as if I had spoken in Mandarin. Your Honor, I said, and this was the moment. I believe the court needs a clearer understanding of my background to assess the plaintiff's claim of incapacity versus my actual competency to manage complex financial affairs. I reached into the inner pocket of my tweed jacket and pulled out a laminated card. Worn smooth at the edges, my name is Evelyn Mitchell Sterling. I am a retired corporate prosecutor for the Southern District of New York. I hold a license to practice law in Massachusetts and New York, active and valid since 1978. I placed the card on the clerk's desk. My license number is 745023. Before retiring, I specialized in exposing high-level securities fraud, money laundering, and corporate embezzlement. The last major case I tried before taking early retirement to raise my daughter was the indictment of the 3 principals of the infamous Ares Group, a case that led to the recovery of $200 million in defrauded investor assets. I looked directly at Marcus Thorne, who was frozen in place. You spent the last hour arguing that I lack the capacity to understand a bank statement. You failed to conduct even a basic background check on the defendant. A simple search of the State Bar Association would have flagged my credentials. This displays a level of negligence that is frankly breathtaking, Mr. Thorne, and proves that your entire case was built on nothing but ageism and prejudice. Charlotte gasped. Mom, you never told me. I turned, my gaze piercing. You never asked, Charlotte. You asked me about ballet recital times and college applications. You asked if I remembered to pick up the dry cleaning. You never once asked about the decade before you were born. In your mind, I was born the day I married your father. A blank slate, easily written over. Thorne finally recovered, shouting, Objection! This changes nothing. 30 years out of practice. This is a deliberate manipulation to embarrass the plaintiff and obstruct justice. Obstruct justice? Judge Vance interjected, her voice dangerously calm. Mr. Thorne, you have accused a former federal prosecutor of incapacity based on 3 perfectly legal, documented, and exceptionally well-managed philanthropic investments. Are you now suggesting she is so cunning that she deliberately orchestrated years of incompetence to trick you into filing a lawsuit just for the pleasure of revealing her past? Yes, Your Honor, Thorne yelled, walking right into the center of the trap. It is evidence of severe manipulative instability. Or, the judge countered, leaning forward, it is evidence of a highly intelligent woman carefully observing who exactly would value her for herself and who would only value her for her wealth. I am inclined to think the latter. The judge called a short recess, primarily to give Mr. Thorne time to pull himself together and to allow the court staff to verify my bar credentials, which, of course, they did instantly. During the break, Gregory rushed into the hallway pulling out his phone. Charlotte, however, came straight to me. Her face was ravaged, not by greed now, but by a deep, shattering confusion. Why, Mom? Why the act? Why the Cypress Hill Fund? Why let us think you were losing it? I led her to a quiet corner. Arthur gave me that fund because he knew you were watching. I used it as a test. I wanted to see if your concern was for me, the confused old woman, or for the money you thought I was wasting. You didn't ask for a doctor, Charlotte. You called a lawyer. But the foundation, she whispered, referring to her $10 million inheritance. He loved me. Why force me to work? He loved you deeply, sweetheart. But he also saw how money corrupted your judgment. He gave you a chance to prove you valued service over wealth. He knew you and Gregory would tear my life apart to get his $85 million. He simply trusted me to know when and how to push back. The next day, Gregory returned with a new, younger lawyer, a viper named David Chen. Chen's strategy was exactly what I'd anticipated, doubling down on the manipulation theory. Your Honor, Chen declared, Mrs. Sterling's revelation is not evidence of competence. It's evidence of malice. She weaponized her vulnerability against her own daughter to cause emotional and financial distress. proving she is unfit for the complexities of modern wealth management. A fine theory. Mr. Chen, I said, standing to address the court, but let us return to my initial evidence. When the money is the point, the motivation is always clear. I looked at Noah and Lily, now clinging to each other by my door, their world fractured in an instant, and I knew exactly what needed to happen. They're my grandchildren. They need stability, and I need purpose. We'll figure it out together. The emergency custody hearing the next morning was a blur of social workers, court-appointed advocates, and overwhelmed officials trying to sort out the chaos Marcus and Victoria had created. Mrs. Thompson, Judge Morrison addressed me directly, her reading glasses perched on her nose. At 73, are you prepared to provide full-time care for 2 young children while their parents face criminal prosecution? Yes, Your Honor, I replied without hesitation. They're my flesh and blood, and they need a stable home. The social worker, a kind-faced woman named Janet Cruz, had conducted a home evaluation at dawn, pronouncing my house more than adequate for the children. The alternative, foster care with strangers, was unthinkable. Noah and Lily sat in the gallery with Patricia, clutching juice boxes and looking shell-shocked. They'd spent the night at Patricia's apartment, while I'd frantically prepared bedrooms and tried to process the magnitude of what I was taking on. Victoria's public defender argued desperately for bail and immediate return of the children. Your Honor, my client was facing financial hardship. Her actions, while ill-advised, were motivated by desperation to keep her family together. Marcus's attorney took a different approach entirely. Your Honor, my client was coerced by his wife into participating in this scheme. He's willing to cooperate fully with the investigation. So that was how it was going to be. 2 rats abandoning a sinking ship, each trying to use the other as a flotation device. Judge Morrison listened with visible skepticism, then reviewed the evidence Patricia had compiled. The pattern of attempted fraud, the calculated key copying, the methodical planning, it all painted a clear picture. Temporary emergency custody to the grandmother, she ruled decisively. Both parents will remain in custody pending trial. Supervised visitation only, contingent on completion of court-mandated programs. As we left the courthouse, I could hear Victoria's sobs echoing through the hallway, but for the first time in months, I felt peace instead of guilt. Grandma? Noah's small voice interrupted my thoughts as we walked to my car. Are we going to live with you now? For a while, sweetheart, until everything gets sorted out. Lily, always more perceivable than her younger brother, asked the harder question. Are Mommy and Daddy coming home soon? I buckled them into the car seats I'd installed that morning, choosing my words with the care of someone defusing a bomb. Your parents made some very serious mistakes, and they have to face the consequences. But you're safe with me, and that's what matters right now. What I didn't say was that their parents were looking at felony charges that could mean years in prison. These children might be with me for a very long time. 3 weeks into our new arrangement, I discovered something that shocked me. I was actually good at this. Not the fun grandmother who visited for holidays and sent the kids home sugared up and overstimulated, but the real deal. The one who made school lunches, helped with homework, and knew exactly which tone to use when Noah tried to negotiate his way out of bath time. Grandma, why did Mommy try to take your house? Lily asked one morning over breakfast, her spoon making lazy circles in her oatmeal. The question I'd been dreading had finally arrived. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that her mother is a thief without destroying her entire concept of safety? Sometimes grown-ups make terrible choices when they're scared, I said carefully. Your mommy was scared about money problems, but instead of asking for help, she tried to take something that didn't belong to her. Noah looked up from his toast. Like when Lily took my action figure? Similar, I replied, but much more serious because grown-ups know better. The answer seemed to satisfy him, but Lily's expression told me she understood far more than she was letting on. 6-year-olds, I was learning, are remarkably perceptive about adult dysfunction. That afternoon, I received a call from Detective Sarah Chen, the lead investigator on the case. Mrs. Thompson, we've uncovered additional evidence that significantly expands the scope of this investigation. Can you come to the station? The evidence, as it turned out, was a digital paper trail showing Marcus and Victoria's scheme went far deeper than a simple home invasion. They'd been systematically planning to seize control of my assets for over 2 years, researching conservatorship laws, consulting with unethical attorneys, and even attempting to bribe a physician's assistant to falsify medical records suggesting I had dementia. They filed preliminary guardianship paperwork 3 weeks before the break-in, Detective Chen explained, sliding documents across her desk. If you hadn't pressed charges, they would have used the incident to claim you were no longer capable of independent living. They'd already identified a care facility and were negotiating the sale of your house. The calculated nature of it all left me breathless. This wasn't desperation or poor judgment. This was premeditated elder abuse, carefully planned and ruthlessly executed. There's more, Detective Chen continued grimly. We found evidence they'd been monitoring your bank accounts through an identity theft scheme. Your bank is conducting a full investigation. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I pulled into my driveway, Noah and Lily were waiting at the window, faces pressed against the glass like eager puppies. "Grandma, we made you something," Noah announced, running to meet me with a construction paper creation covered in glitter and crayon drawings. "Welcome home." Grandma was written in Lily's careful printing, with Noah's name scrawled underneath in purple marker. Looking at their innocent faces, I realized the truth. Marcus and Victoria's greatest crime wasn't trying to steal my money. It was almost destroying these children's lives in the process. The trial began on a gray Monday in February, exactly 6 months after the invasion. The courtroom was packed with reporters drawn by the sensational story. Grandmother jails own son for home invasion scheme. Marcus had hired an expensive defense attorney who argued financial desperation and mental health crisis. Victoria's lawyer painted her as a misguided wife following her husband's lead. Both strategies felt hollow when faced with the mountain of evidence. The forged documents, the stolen keys, the calculated planning. When they called me to testify, I took the stand with trembling hands and told the truth about years of manipulation, the incompetency threats, and the violation of my home. But I also talked about the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers, and the young man who'd once protected me from an aggressive dog in the park. "Mrs. Thompson," the prosecutor asked, "was your son's behavior calculated or impulsive?" I looked at Marcus, sitting at the defendant's table with tears streaming down his face, and realized I knew the answer. "Both," I said quietly. He calculated how to exploit me, but he impulsively destroyed everything that mattered in the process. Victoria had already accepted a plea deal, receiving 3 years in prison in exchange for testimony against Marcus. Her betrayal seemed to break something in him during her testimony. He stared at her with the hollow expression of someone who'd finally realized he'd married a viper. The jury deliberated for 8 hours before returning guilty verdicts. On all major charges, breaking and entering, grand theft, conspiracy, attempted elder abuse, and identity theft, Judge Morrison sentenced Marcus to 5 years in prison with possibility of parole in 3. She also ordered full restitution for my stolen property and mandated extensive counseling for both parents. As the bailiff led Marcus away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one last time. "Take care of my kids," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I will," I promised, meaning every word. But what I didn't expect was how much taking care of them would heal something broken inside me too. Now, 18 months later, I stand in my kitchen watching Noah carefully separate his cereal by color while Lily practices piano in the living room. The sound should drive me crazy. It would have driven the old me crazy, but somehow it's become the soundtrack of our peaceful life. My son earned early parole last month and wants to see the children. I've agreed to supervised visits because I've learned something important. You can set boundaries without abandoning people. And sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable destruction. Marcus will never live in this house again. That boundary is permanent. But he's working hard to earn the right to be in his children's lives. And these children, thriving, confident, and secure, deserve to know their father can change. At 75, I'm busier than I've been in decades, but also more fulfilled. These children have given me a purpose I never expected to find. My house, The one Marcus tried to steal is filled with laughter, homework struggles, and the beautiful chaos of young lives unfolding. And me? I've discovered something profound. My worth was never measured by my usefulness to others, but by my willingness to protect what mattered most. Today, watching my grandchildren play in the yard of the house that almost wasn't mine, I know exactly who I am. I'm a woman who chose love over resentment, boundaries over revenge, and healing over bitterness. And that, dear friends, is the inheritance I'll actually leave behind. Not money or property, but the knowledge that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say no to the people you love most, and trust that real love survives the consequences. This old house has seen a lot of heartbreak, but it's also witnessed something miraculous, a family learning to heal, one difficult choice at a time.